I was 19 when this happened, and back then my life was about as normal as it could get. I was a full-time community college student, still living at home, trying to balance classes, a part-time job, and figuring out what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. Most of my days followed the same routine. Wake up, head to campus, sit through lectures, grab a coffee, and spend a couple of extra hours studying somewhere quiet before going home. Nothing exciting. Nothing dangerous. Nothing worth remembering. That day started just like any other. It was early spring in Ohio, the kind of day where the air still felt cold, but the sunlight finally had some warmth in it. I went to my morning classes, met a friend for lunch, and then sat through a long afternoon lecture that felt like it would never end. By the time my last class was over, the hallways were already thinning out. People rushed to their cars, eyes down, backpacks half-zipped, ready to go home and forget about school for a few hours. I wasn't in a hurry, though. I had an English paper due the next morning, so I headed to the computer lab to finish it. I wasn't nervous, tired, or stressed. It was just another normal Wednesday. I printed my paper, grabbed the warm pages off the tray, and started walking down the main hallway toward the exit. The building was quiet, but not in a creepy way. Just empty. Community colleges empty out fast. Most students commute, and there's no reason to hang around once your classes are done. I remember thinking how peaceful it felt. The overhead lights gave everything that soft yellow glow they always have in the evening. The floors were freshly waxed, so they reflected a perfect upside-down version of the ceiling. I could hear my footsteps echo as I walked, steady and alone. A vending machine hummed somewhere behind me. A locker door creaked slightly as the building's air system kicked on. Nothing unusual. I was scrolling through my phone, checking the time, thinking about what I wanted for dinner. Probably something quick. Maybe a sandwich or leftover pasta. I wasn't paying much attention to anything else. I didn't feel watched. I didn't hear anything strange. There was nothing in the air that suggested danger. But as I passed the row of storage rooms near the back stairwell, I noticed something small. Something that didn't fit the normal picture of a closing campus. One of the storage room doors was slightly open, just an inch, maybe two, and I could see darkness behind it. Not the normal kind of darkness you expect in a room with no windows. This darkness felt heavier, like the door was hiding something that didn't want to be seen. And right before I walked past it, I heard the faintest sound from inside. A slow, controlled exhale. Someone in there was trying not to breathe too loudly. The building I was in that night was the Liberal Arts Center on the east side of my community college campus. If you've ever been in one of those older academic buildings, long beige hallways, square ceiling lights, outdated posters taped to the walls, you can probably picture it exactly. It wasn't a fancy place, just a practical one. 4 floors, a few computer labs, a handful of classrooms that always smelled faintly like dry erase markers, and a quiet stairwell that most students never used unless they had to. It was early evening, just after 7:30 p.m. That's the time of day when the building starts to shift from active to empty. You can still hear leftover noise from late classes, rolling chairs, closing binders, someone laughing as they walk out the door, but it fades quickly. After 8 p.m., everything goes still. The lights stay on, but the energy changes. It feels like the building belongs to no one. I stayed late that night because I had to finish printing my English assignment. My home printer hadn't worked in months, and I didn't feel like fighting with it again. The computer lab in the Liberal Arts Center was reliable, and it was usually open until closing time. That lab was the only reason I was still on campus, when most people were already home eating dinner or scrolling on their phones. There weren't many people left in the building that night. I passed a janitor early on, Mr. Nolan, a quiet older guy who always nodded politely but never talked much. He pushed his cart past me while humming some old tune under his breath. He was the kind of person you see almost every day but barely know anything about. I also saw one of my classmates, Jenna, packing up her things in the computer lab as I walked in. She was leaving just as I was sitting down. We traded a quick "see ya," and she headed out the door with her earbuds already in. She didn't seem stressed or in a hurry. She was just done for the day. No reason for either of us to think anything strange was going on. By the time I finished typing and printing my paper, the building felt nearly empty. I could hear the heating system clicking in the walls, and every sound seemed a little louder because there weren't many people left to drown it out. The atmosphere wasn't scary, it was just calm, quiet, routine. I wasn't thinking about danger or anything out of the ordinary. I wasn't scared. I wasn't even alert. I was just a tired 19-year-old trying to finish an assignment on time and get home before my mom asked why I was eating dinner so late. Everything felt normal. Everything looked normal. And at that point, I had no reason to think anything was wrong with being there alone, walking toward the exit, carrying a stack of freshly printed papers, and thinking about nothing more serious than what I'd watch on TV before falling asleep. On my way out of the computer lab, the first thing I noticed was how quiet the hallway had become. Normally, even late in the evening, there's at least some background noise, someone typing behind a door, a professor packing up their bag, a late student hurrying out before the building closes. But this time, the silence felt thicker. It wasn't just empty. It felt like the building was holding its breath. I walked down the hallway with my papers tucked under my arm, scrolling through my phone with my free hand. For a moment, everything seemed fine. But when I passed the first corner, I felt a slight chill run across the back of my neck. The air was cooler there, cooler than it should have been, almost like a window had been left open somewhere. Except there were no windows in that hallway. Just walls and storage rooms. At first, I didn't think much of it. Old buildings always have weird drafts. But then I heard something soft coming from behind me. It was fast, almost like a shoe sliding on the floor for half a second. I turned around, expecting to see someone who'd forgotten something, and rushed back inside. But the hallway was completely empty. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound. I shook it off and kept walking. A few seconds later, I heard it again. This time it was a very light tap, like someone touching the wall with their knuckles. Not knocking, just testing the surface. The sound came from the direction of the storage rooms. I slowed down a little, listening. For a moment there was nothing. Just silence. Then another tap. Softer. Almost hesitant. I looked over my shoulder again. Nothing. No shadows, no movement. No sign of anyone else being there. But the taps sounded real. Close enough that I knew I didn't imagine them. The lights in that section of the building were motion-activated, and the ones ahead of me turned on as I stepped forward. But one light flickered instead of switching on fully. Just a quick stutter, like it struggled to stay lit. It wasn't broken, just inconsistent, blinking every couple of seconds. Each flash lit up the hallway, then left it in a dim semi-darkness. I walked past the area carefully, keeping my eyes forward. The chill in the air felt stronger now. Not freezing, but sharp enough that it made me tighten my grip on my papers. Then I heard a sound that made me stop mid-step. Breathing. Not close, but not far either. Slow. Even breaths coming from somewhere to my left. I turned my head slightly, without fully facing the direction it came from. The storage room door, one I'd passed 100 times before, was open a crack. Maybe 2 inches. The room behind it was completely dark. I didn't hear movement. I didn't see anything shift. But the breathing stopped the same second I stopped walking. That was the part that bothered me. It stopped because I stopped. I stood there for a moment, trying to convince myself it was the building, air vents, pipes, something mechanical. But I couldn't shake a small, uncomfortable thought settling into the back of my mind. Something wasn't right. Someone else was still in the building. And they didn't want me to know where they were. I forced myself to keep walking, even though every part of me wanted to turn around and look into that storage room. But I didn't. I kept my eyes forward and my pace steady, pretending I hadn't heard anything. Pretending I didn't feel that faint, cold pressure of someone watching me from the dark. I made it a few more steps before the building settled again into silence. Too much silence. The kind that feels like it's waiting for something. I tried to shake it off. I told myself it was the late hour, the emptiness, my own nerves. But the feeling wouldn't go away. My heartbeat started moving faster, not because something had happened, but because I could feel something about to happen. When I reached the second hallway, right before the stairwell, I heard footsteps. This time they weren't subtle. They weren't soft or hesitant. They were slow, heavy steps that landed with intention. One at a time. coming from the direction I had just walked through. I froze. Not because I wanted to, but because the sound locked me in place. The footsteps weren't hurried or confused. They sounded like someone who already knew exactly where I was. I turned my head slightly, just enough to see the reflection in the glass of a classroom door next to me. In the warped reflection, I could see the far end of the hallway. There was a figure standing there. A man. Motionless. Facing me directly. He wasn't close enough for details, but I could tell he wasn't a student. His posture was too stiff, and his clothes looked worn. Dark jacket, something bulky in his pockets, maybe. He didn't move. He didn't call out. He just stood there, like he'd been waiting for me to turn around. For a moment, I couldn't even breathe. I forced myself to walk again, trying to keep my pace normal, but inside I felt the panic rising. The hallway stretched ahead of me, long and too bright, with nowhere to hide. My footsteps echoed louder now, almost blending with his. And then, just to confirm my fear, I heard his steps resume. Slow. Steady. Following me. I wasn't imagining it anymore. Someone was actually behind me, and they weren't trying to stay hidden now. When I reached the corner before the stairwell, I risked one more look in the reflection. He was closer this time. Not running. Not rushing. Just closing the distance, step by step, like he knew I had limited options. The stairwell door was 20 feet ahead. Another hallway branched off to the right, completely empty. Every instinct told me to run, but I didn't want to trigger him into running too. I kept walking at the same speed, even though my legs felt like they were barely holding me up. Then the worst thing happened. The motion sensor light above the stairwell flickered and didn't turn on. The entire area was dim, almost shadowed. If I went in there, I'd be half blind for a few seconds. I stopped for just a moment, trying to decide what to do. And in that exact second, the footsteps behind me stopped too. Not because he was confused. Not because he was tired. He stopped because I stopped. He was matching me move for move. That's when the realization hit me hard and clear. I wasn't mistaken. I wasn't paranoid. I was being hunted. The moment the man stopped walking behind me, a surge of panic hit my chest so hard I felt dizzy. I didn't want to look back. I didn't want to confirm how close he was. But I also knew I couldn't just stand there waiting for him to close the distance on his own. So I made a choice. I pushed the stairwell door open and stepped inside. The light didn't come on. The stairwell was dim, lit only by a tiny emergency bulb on the wall. But I didn't care. I'd rather take my chances in low light than stand in a hallway with a man who was stalking me step for step. As the door swung shut behind me, I heard him move, fast. The sound of shoes scraping and then hitting the floor in a quicker rhythm. He was no longer trying to stay calm or hidden. He was coming. I didn't hesitate. I took the stairs down two at a time, gripping the rail as I went. The stairwell echoed with every step I made, but it wasn't the echo that terrified me. It was the sound of the door slamming open above me. He had followed me in. His footsteps pounded against the metal steps now. Heavy. Rushing. The sound bounced off the walls so loudly that I couldn't tell exactly how close he was, only that he was getting closer. I reached the bottom floor, pushed through the steel door, and ran into the lower hallway. It was darker than the upper floors, with only a few lights still on. At the far end was a side exit that most students never used. My plan was simple: reach that door, get outside, and call 911. But as soon as I started running, I realized how long the hallway really was. It stretched ahead like some endless corridor, and I could hear the stairwell door slam open behind me. He had made it down the stairs. His footsteps were louder now, not sprinting, but fast enough to tell me he wasn't trying to hide anymore. He was chasing me. My breath was sharp and shallow. My hands were shaking so badly, I dropped my printed paper somewhere behind me, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I reached the exit door and pulled the handle. It didn't budge. A thick metal latch at the top was locked in place. Probably by maintenance. Probably hours earlier. My stomach dropped. I pulled it again and again, praying it would give, but it stayed locked solid. That's when I heard the footsteps slow down. Then they stopped completely. I didn't turn around. I just backed up against the door, hands trembling, trying to dial 911 on my phone. The screen kept blurring from my shaking. I could hear him breathing now, slow, heavy breaths filling the hallway.
Close.
Too close. I finally forced myself to look. He stood in the middle of the hallway, halfway between the stairwell and me. His jacket was dirty, his face half in shadow. His hands were in his pockets, but I could see something bulging inside one of them. Something long. Something solid. He didn't speak. He didn't shout. He just stared at me like I'd interrupted something he had already planned. My phone connected. I whispered help into the receiver as quietly as I could while keeping my eyes on him. The second he realized I was calling someone, he stepped forward. That was enough to break me loose. I ran to the right, down a narrow side hallway that led to the janitor's closet and a maintenance door. I didn't look back. I didn't want to know how close he was. I just bolted. I reached the janitor's closet, yanked it open, slipped inside, and pulled the door shut. Then I crouched behind a stack of boxes, holding my breath as the hallway outside filled with his footsteps, slow now, searching.
He was looking for me.
And he wasn't leaving. I stayed in that janitor's closet for what felt like forever, holding my breath every time his footsteps passed by the door. Sometimes he walked slow, like he was checking each corner. Other times, he moved quickly, like he thought he'd heard something. The hallway outside was narrow, and every sound bounced around the walls. I couldn't tell if he was inches away or further down. I just knew he wasn't leaving. While I crouched there, still on the phone with the 911 dispatcher, I tried to give the operator every detail I could whisper. My voice was shaking so badly that I had to repeat myself twice. They told me officers were already on the way and to stay hidden no matter what. So I stayed there, pressed into the shadows, praying he wouldn't try the door. A few minutes later, something changed. His footsteps stopped completely. Not slowed, just stopped.
No breathing.
No movement. Nothing. The silence was so sudden it made my stomach turn. For a second, I thought he'd left, that maybe he'd panicked when I called the police. But the silence didn't feel right. It felt like he'd just decided to wait. Then, very quietly, I heard something. A small scraping sound. Metal against metal. Right outside the closet. I looked down at the bottom of the door and saw a shadow shift in the thin line of light underneath. He was standing directly in front of it. He wasn't trying the handle. He wasn't speaking. He was just there. The dispatcher must have heard my breathing change because she kept telling me, "Help is almost there. Stay where you are. Don't move." I clung to the phone like it was the only thing keeping me alive. And then, suddenly, the man's footsteps moved away. Slow at first, then a little faster, like he'd decided on something. I waited a few seconds before risking a closer look through the crack between the door and the frame. The hallway was empty. Completely empty. That's when I heard voices. Not his, police officers calling out, announcing themselves. I stepped out of the closet shaking so badly I could barely stand. When the police reached me, they escorted me out of the building immediately. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see him lurking in some corner. But the real twist didn't come until I was outside, wrapped in a blanket, sitting on the back bumper of an ambulance. One of the officers walked over to me with this strange look on his face. Not sympathy. Not shock. Something else. Something uneasy. He asked me to confirm the description again. I repeated everything. The jacket, the posture, the way he stood there like he'd been waiting for me. The officer nodded slowly. Then he told me the part that didn't fit anything I thought I knew. They had checked the cameras. Every hallway. Every angle. And the man had been in the building for days. Not just that night. Not just those last few minutes. For 4 nights straight, he'd slipped into the building after it closed and stayed there. Sometimes in the stairwells. Sometimes in empty classrooms. And, the worst part? He always chose spots where he could watch people without being seen. Including the computer lab. Including the hallway I walked every day. Including the storage room I passed earlier. The officers showed me still images from the cameras. In one of them, taken 2 days before, I was printing something in the lab. The man was standing in the dark corner behind the glass wall. watching me the whole time. And I never noticed him. The police stayed with me outside the building for almost an hour. They searched every room, every stairwell, every corner where the man could have hidden. I kept expecting them to walk up and tell me they found him, that it was over. But each time an officer returned, the news was the same. He was gone. It didn't make sense. There was only one way out of that lower hallway, and officers had been blocking the exits within minutes of my call. They checked the bathrooms, the closets, even the ceiling tiles. Nothing. He had simply disappeared. Eventually, one of the officers drove me home. They told me they'd patrol the college for the next few nights and suggested I avoid staying late for a while. I nodded, but I barely heard them. My mind kept replaying the image of him in that dark corner of the computer lab days earlier, standing completely still, watching me type without my slightest awareness. When I got home, I went straight to my room and locked the door. I didn't talk to my parents much that night. I didn't want to explain what happened because I didn't fully understand it myself. I just sat in bed, staring at the blank wall and listening to the quiet house around me. Every sound made me jump. A branch hitting the siding, the refrigerator kicking on, my dad closing a door downstairs. For the first time in my life, normal house sounds felt wrong, like they were covering something up. I barely slept. The next morning, I woke up with this heavy feeling in my chest, like someone had pressed a cold hand against my ribs and left it there. I didn't want to go back to campus, but I didn't have much of a choice. I had classes and exams soon and a group project meeting I couldn't miss. I convinced myself it was safe. The police were aware. The building would be busier during the day. And besides, he wouldn't come back in daylight. That's what I kept repeating while walking across the parking lot. When I reached the building, everything looked normal. Students walking around. Doors open. Sunshine coming through the windows. Nothing threatening. But the moment I stepped into the lobby, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. The bulletin board near the entrance had a new campus security notice pinned to it. Not typed. Handwritten. A piece of lined notebook paper, torn at the edges. The writing was uneven, pressed too hard into the page. At first I thought it was a student joke, until I read it. Lock your doors. Someone is watching. There was no signature.
No explanation.
And the handwriting didn't belong to any student I knew. I stood there staring at it for a long time, trying to convince myself it wasn't connected. Maybe it was unrelated. Maybe someone was trying to be funny. But then I remembered the stillness of that storage room door. The slow breathing. The footsteps matching mine. The way he seemed to anticipate every movement I made. This wasn't random. He hadn't just stumbled into the building that night. He had been watching for days. Maybe longer. Classes went on like normal. Everyone else laughed, talked, studied, and lived their lives like nothing was wrong. But the whole time, I kept feeling that weight on my chest, like ice pressing against the back of my neck. And even now, months later, whenever I walk past a dark room or hear footsteps behind me in an empty hallway, that feeling comes back. Because the police never found him. They never figured out how he got in, or how he slipped out. And they never found a single fingerprint. Whoever he was,
He's still out there somewhere.
and sometimes, when I'm leaving campus late, I swear I hear those same slow footsteps behind me, matching mine, step for step, just far enough away that I can't be sure they're real.